Hello and welcome back to the Design Principles podcast. I am your host, Ben Sutherland from Bear Architecture, and I'm here today with Sam Brown from Red Architects and Gerard Dombroski from Gerard Dombroski Workshop. Today we will be discussing taking on group home builders. But before we do that, little segue. Did you guys happen to watch the Super Bowl yesterday?
I watched the first half and the halftime show, but then had to parent, so I didn't manage to get the second half in.
Fair.
Oh, I did the other half. I did the second half, but so between me and Sam, we watched the whole game.
Oh, nice. It was a good game. It was a long game. But the reason I just wanted to bring that up real quick was Mahomes, the quarterback, guess how much he gets paid? You probably know this, Sam, but...
Only because you told me last night.
I have no idea.
$500 million.
What?
They pay him $500 million. Isn't that insane?
Imagine if he could put some of that money back into the community.
Oh, mate, that's at least 2 architecturally designed houses you could afford with $500 million.
I saw
Just 2.
They put a stat up that it was $850,000 American dollars was the average wage.
Yeah.
So there must be some people right at the bottom offsetting that wage.
Absolutely. Average. There was one guy on, in one of the 2 finals, one of their teams, I can't remember which one, but he was only earning $890,000, and the presenters were giving him grief about being so underpaid.
Crazy wealth disparity, eh?
Oh, it's insane. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton's 7-time world champion, Formula One world champion, and he gets paid $100 million, which is epic, but, no, not $500 million, which is, crazy.
Maybe we start a sports podcast.
Mate, Formula One is basically... I would argue the sport for architects, right? If architects had a sport, it would probably be Formula One.
How do you justify that?
Well, in my opinion, it's basically the same thing, right? There's a high element of design and engineering.
Yeah, it's the design race I'm in for.
Yeah, exactly. It also
America's Cup.
Each one of those Formula One teams, they've got about 1,000 people working for them. For one car. Can you imagine? Maybe 2 cars. That's basically the same as building a house.
So essentially, they're like group home builders. They have 1,000 people working for them for one house design.
No, they're the architecturally designed buildings. Yeah. Group home buildings are your Toyotas, your Mazdas, your everyday
cars. The problem
cars.
there, Ben, is Toyotas are a sure bet. They're safe.
Yeah, well...
Are you arguing that a group home build house is of a acceptable quality?
I'm arguing that they get that quality through consistency, repetition, and economies of scale.
Fair. These are good points. So does that bring us back into the conversation?
Back into the conversation. Well, who wants to kick us off with a description of what a group home builder actually is?
I've got a little thing here. So what this is from ArchiPro. So this is actually from the architecture side, but group home builders and design home builders, companies that generally offer packages, which sometimes also include land, standard house plans and designs, project management and construction, often described as turnkey solutions that when the house is completed, they're handed over and clients are ready to move into. That description, to me, with the exception of the standard house plans, just describes what we do.
Well, do you manage the build? I guess you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you don't buy buy the section, or they all go around and buy up half a suburb first.
That's probably that is one key difference for sure.
Put a huge amount of capital up front.
But that again comes back into that economies of scale thing, right? They're dealing with, and I've got an interesting stat here. Hold on, I'm just going to open up my show notes. I think it's GJ Gardner's
The number one
Um,
residential builder in New Zealand.
Number one residential builder in New Zealand.
By a long
They
shot.
pump out a shit
So last year, they had approximately, where is it? 884 projects. That doesn't specify the number of houses, but the number of dwellings constructed under that was upwards of 7,000, I think.
So is that building consents you're talking about processed or?
So dwellings is, but projects isn't. So what that's telling you is
they build a lot.
They are doing projects where they're building a dozen houses all at once, essentially, or more. And again, that comes back to that economies of scale thing, you know, like when are we afforded that opportunity to do something like that on a regular basis?
Well, they create those opportunities, don't they?
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. They take on a lot more risk by, you know, if you're going to buy a whole suburb or whatever.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if you had an architectural outfit that had the buying capacity, or I guess the capital capacity internally of a group home builder, what we could achieve.
Yeah, potentially. However, do you think so group home builders, they cater for a huge market segment, right? They
somewhere I've heard 90% of the housing market in New Zealand is either group home or design build solutions. I searched and searched and searched to see if I could validate that statistic. I couldn't find anything. I think I've just heard it colloquially through the profession.
It's a SAM stat.
And that architects are, between like 5 and 10%.
Yeah.
So
I think they're worse than that.
They cater to, the vast majority of the community in New Zealand.
Oh, 100%. And so their market is kind of different to typically what you see in architects' market, which is generally more business class or first class, or the top 2, 3, 4%, maybe 6% of the country.
Yeah, and I find that a really interesting point, because that traditionally, and to a certain extent, is still the case, but it doesn't need to be. We're sort of, I think, it's a little bit of a misnomer, and rightly so sometimes, that architects are for the elite, but I think that it doesn't have to be the case. Like, we're more than capable of creating architectural solutions for all of society. And you can see it so much now, particularly in Kainga Ora projects, where architects are being employed to come up with these like large-scale solutions. Why can't we, or why shouldn't we be considered to do this on a more regular basis, and maybe not necessarily on a large development scale, but even from an individual home-to-home scale?
But I guess like social housing has historically always been kind of a realm of architects, and architects are always interested in tackling that challenge. It's like a huge part of modernism and why it failed, pushing the boat out a little too far. But I don't know, do we have any examples of architecture actually coming in on that sort of budget? I think like the main reason everyone goes for a group home is the predictability, and they've got a limited sort of financial pool to work from, and they want a sure thing, and you can kind of understand that. And I guess like the challenge for architects to get in there is like, how do you solve that issue of like guarantee a fixed price or something like?
Yeah, and I think that comes back again to, we've already mentioned it a couple of times, and this is probably going to be the crux of a lot of our discussion today, is that economies of scale. Like for us, if we can design a house, and we've attempted to do it ourselves, the most bare bones structure possible, but with a focus purely on performance, really, and aesthetics, obviously, because we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't. But we're using a one-off bespoke builder, right? So his buying power, he might buy 100 sheets of jib, for example. GJ Gardner or Genian or whoever, one of the group home builds, they'll come in, they'll buy 1 million sheets of jib, and they'll they'll warehouse them.
I'll start producing the jib if they have
ferry them around. All this stuff. Well, exactly right. Fletcher's right. That they've got their own group home building arm.
They're the second biggest after GJ Gardner.
Exactly. So a lot of it comes down to the ability that these guys have, or these big players have, to buy and stockpile material, and also in a lot of cases get cheaper labor as well. It's sort of a shame that can't somehow, and I don't know how, I don't have the answer here, but like how that can't infiltrate into the architectural realm so that we can be providing high quality, high performing designs, but still have their buying power, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just breaking it down a little bit further, they're doing a couple of good things. I mean, a couple of cheats, really. First of all, they only really build on flat sites.
Yes.
So
okay.
I think that's quite important to point out, really, because, I mean, yes, there are a lot of flat sites, but it definitely makes it a lot easier and a lot cheaper, that's for sure. Anyone who's built a house in Wellington will know firsthand it is expensive. Anything to do with earthworks, your bill goes through the roof, and it's virtually impossible to put a figure to it up front, because who knows what you're going to uncover as soon as you start breaking ground, which is, in terms of lending is very important point.
Yeah, all the big suburbs are like all terraced and pre-engineered for flat sites, so it's even.
But that flat site thing's interesting because what it contributes to is urban sprawl, particularly in somewhere like, well, actually, no, regardless of where you are. If you're somewhere like Christchurch, where the city predominantly, other than the Port Hills, but if you're going west, north and south, it's flat. So these sort of developments or these suburbs are able to grow, but they just keep growing out and out and out and out and out. Somewhere like Wellington, for instance, where we've sort of reached the limit of our city boundary, you have to try and find and inhabit the interstitial space. These little leftover sites, these pockets of land that are remaining, and that precludes these group home build solutions, which is a shame, because if they had a little bit more flexibility, you'd be able to use that buying power, that cheaper construction cost, but still be able to build on these more difficult sites.
Well, Gerard and I actually worked on a project together up on the hills up there in Wellington once, and the neighbouring site was a group home build. Actually, the whole development was, and it always used to make me laugh because basically they come in and they just put this gigantic retaining wall in to create a flat section on their site.
Yeah.
These retaining walls were like, I don't know, they were solid, man. They were like 10 meters tall. Boom, flat site.
The funny thing with that is the cost in doing that earthworks, or I guess in those establishment works, must be huge. Who's absorbing that? Because it's clearly not getting passed on to the client, right?
I guess it's just built into the feasibility at the beginning.
Yeah.
I feel like that one was built into the client. But again, I guess then if you're going back to, if a group home's offering the solution, they probably already own the site. So then they've already done that.
For sure.
Sort of feasibility. Yeah, I think like there's multiple facets to this discussion. Like if you step back further, there's like the urban issue of like, why are we creating sprawling suburbs? And for that quarter acre dream, which I guess everyone sees in movies, all these American movies as a kid. Like,
well, I don't even think it's an American thing. I think it's an ingrained sort of a Kiwi, maybe not maybe expectation, but it's something that we have all grown up with to a degree.
Yeah, which goes further back to the invention of a car and putting all your
apartment living
in a place where you can go drive to and park and do all your shopping.
Yeah, but apartment living is such a foreign concept to us as a nation. Yeah,
it's because we have space,
and we've got low population in comparison.
Yeah, I guess we don't really think about planning our cities around a future densification.
But so another reason why they do that, though, is obviously just going back to that whole repetition thing. Basically, that allows them to recycle plans over and over again by, yes, they can just change this and that, a wall here, a wall there, cladding type, a kitchen type but essentially they're just redoing the same thing over and over again, which has huge advantages. Like anyone who's, tried to get into the prefabrication realm or anything like that will know that mass production is your best friend when it comes to cost cutting or cost saving, because labor is expensive, and having to reinvent the wheel every time is an expensive process. So would architects or designers, like, how are they going to compete with that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'd be really intrigued to get your take on this, Ben. We recently have been developing in our studio, and what I'm trying to relate this to is that I guess that repetitive design nature. And instead of basically cut and paste of a house, why could you not realize efficiencies in modularization? And I'd be really interested to get your take, particularly from your time at Makers and the past work and research that you've done before, Ben. But what we've recently started to do, we work a lot with SIP panels, and we've developed over the last sort of 6 months these 6 SIP housing options. And they're very easily customizable because everything's set out to a standard module, 1200 by 2400. And you can essentially reform or remodel a house however you want, as long as you stick to the rule of 1200 by 2400. And regardless of whether what I'm trying to say is you have full design flexibility to a degree, but you're still realizing those same efficiencies because you're not reproducing the same design over and over again, but you're reproducing the same design concepts and construction methodologies, but you're getting freedom of creativity. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting area to explore.
So you're recycling the design process, not the actual design itself.
Correct. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Grid, details, all the same.
Yeah.
Eaves, corners.
And
yeah, so you essentially, like, all your detailing is exactly the same. All that you're changing is you're adjusting the form however you want based off this module.
And would you consider that an economical or a more cost-effective process?
I think so, and I think twofold. From a design point of view and from like architects' fees, engineers' fees, or the consultant or the upfront costs before you're even on site, there's huge efficiencies there because we're not having to reinvent the wheel every single time we do a design. All the back information's there, all the hard work's being done. You can essentially just shop a form. And then from a construction point of view, and this is a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, you need the egg before the chicken can hatch in this sense. And what I'm trying to say there is that you need builders to become familiar with this construction technique, particularly with SIPs. It's quite new, particularly for a lot of builders in New Zealand. But once that knowledge and expertise is there, it's so quick and so efficient that I can see there being huge cost reductions. And I haven't even got to the point of performance yet. The performance outline from this type of construction is so much higher than standard stick frame.
One question I have, because this kind of reminds me of back in the day we were building all these CLT buildings, but the problem is that you still have to conform to code or modern code, and I'm pretty sure a lot of improvements are happening in that realm around sort of more modular, especially around like SIPs and some prefabrication components, but there's still a huge element of it that has to be traditionally built. Like, it's so easy to just get in there, put the SIPs up, right? But then you have to put the cladding on and do all that stuff in a traditional manner. So where is the cost saving? Is it in the product, or is it because standing frames? That's not exactly a hard or a slow process. Like, standing the frames is actually quite easy. So what is it about that methodology that could potentially, or this is the same with prefabrication, like what is it that allows you to be more competitive?
I think it's the potential, and this is slightly untapped, I'd say, but to construct essentially fully formed cassettes particularly the prefabrication side of things, Ben, is like you could create these modular wall panels that have everything in them, from the cladding all the way through to the interior lining, services, the whole works, all built in a factory under perfect conditions. So you're realizing huge efficiencies there because you're not being affected by weather. You've got you're maximizing material efficiencies and that sort of thing. And I think that's where there's the opportunity or the ability to seriously reduce the costs, is by maximizing efficiencies in time and material usage, maybe not necessarily detailing.
I think that one thing that you just said there, timing. So in my opinion, you have to offset these huge overheads of running a factory or owning a factory because it is expensive with speed. And so if you're not getting that speed, then you're not making those savings. One thing I will say, though, in terms of prefabrication, in my experience, is quality. In my opinion, quality is better. It's easier to control quality. So I'm obviously pro prefabrication. However, if you're not getting those speed, if you're not getting that speed of construction, then basically it ends up being more or less the same price as you would, if you build it on site. But yeah, once again, higher quality. So I don't know. I think it comes down to how fast you can construct these buildings. And I don't think you get that if you had that repetition, then that's when those savings. That's when you start seeing some decent savings.
Quality is an interesting point, and this may be a bit of a segue, but I think it's worth discussing. I mean, a lot of the argument against this sort of design build or group home build options is that the quality isn't very high. And that's, it's kind of widely understood. It's fine, but it's not, from a performance point of view, and even from a material and finishing point of view, it's not the highest quality. Do you think that's necessarily a group home build issue, or do you think that's a code issue? A lot of these companies are designing to the building code, which is absolutely acceptable. But is our building code good enough? I think that's an interesting topic.
This is a tough one, because we all know, anyone who's had any experience in the construction industry, especially on the construction side, is we all know how expensive materials can be. So what these guys are doing is they're basically targeting that minimum standard, which is still above what is currently perceived as adequate within the construction standards, in order to keep costs down, so they can hit their target segment, who are generally, don't really have the price, the money to buy more expensive products. So until you start seeing those supply chain economics, I don't think it's realistic, unfortunately.
Yeah, in terms of detailing, you'll still see the same details underneath a rain screen. A shit ton of houses around Queenstown will have a beautiful rain screen over top, and they'll still have Hardys all over it. We're not necessarily seeing a huge change in details. I think the main difference is quality of design, where they just design in a series of squares attaching to each other, so then you get a real complex roof around it, and then it's not really designed around the sun or anything, so it's just a very unthought out building plonked on a site and not overly fussed on where the sun's coming from or anything. So I think that's the major difference, is quality of living spaces that they're making.
Absolutely.
Generally pretty rubbish.
And that's the issue, and that's why we need more architects or designers to really somehow figure out a way to build more. One thing I can potentially think about is just leaning into working with developers.
Yeah.
They're doing all the feasibility side of things, and I'm throughout my career, I've seen more and more people kind of want to start to or embrace working with developers. Weirdly, at the beginning, it kind of felt like a gross thing to do, and you're just going to end up designing rubbish. But in my opinion, designing less bad is still a huge win, which is a bad thing to say, but if you're not going to do it, they could go somewhere else and the outcome could be significantly different. So I'm all for it.
It's interesting because there's sort of two ways you can approach improving this huge chunk of the built environment, or the particularly residential built environment in New Zealand. Like you said, Ben, it's us working more with developers, and it's not even just developers. It's like somehow ingratiating architecture or architectural input into the group home building realm a little bit more. And like you said, Gerard, it's being able to have us as experts, highly trained experts, having that input about site placing, location of the sun and things like that. That's one avenue. And then I think another really interesting avenue is enforcement through like either code changes or standards. And code changes is a pretty clear one. And even with the new recent H1 changes, obviously a lot of these houses are having to up their performance standard, which is key. But it would be really interesting to see something along the lines of, like Homestar being adopted by the group home build sector that just across the board lifts the quality of their buildings and the built environment. And it's really awesome that an organization like Kaianga Ora have adopted, Homestar as a standard. So all of their buildings now have to be rated. And so they're almost holding themselves accountable in terms of quality. And it'd be really interesting to see group home builders sort of adopt that same mentality, because ultimately that's going to better serve the New Zealand general public.
Yeah, I think there's lots of sides to the discussion. I think on the quality, I think it's a slippery slope because the more complexity and the higher you raise the bar and the more rules you add, the higher the cost of housing is going to be. And like we're trying to, I guess, a huge part of building is trying to get humans into dwelling spaces, and like we're just like making it harder and harder with each rule that gets added. Like
this runs all the way back to the economies of scale. The only reason that a lot of these things are considered difficult or expensive at the moment is that they're not mass. There's no like mass input of them, if you know what I mean. Like if group home builders were all creating homes that had less than or like 1 air change per hour rather than 6 to 10, then that cost of construction is probably not going to increase because it's across the board, right? And they've got that buying power already.
Like initially the price is always going to go up, and I've never seen prices come down again after like builders realise they can make more money out of something. Like,
for sure.
Like through COVID, prices of materials skyrocketed and they haven't really dropped, to my understanding. Like
no, and they're not. And
building prices are still going up, and like there's no regulation or like
not enough
materials.
competition.
I think like
unfortunately,
regulation of materials and actual like product competitiveness in the market is a hell of a lot better. Like if you're going to supplement these other things, then you need to like manage the cost of these things as well. Like otherwise, some of these larger building companies are going to make extreme profits, and people like profits, and it's greed is a pretty natural human thing. So once it's tantalizing. Once you have that money, you're probably not going to relinquish it that easily.
But that's why maybe it needs to be code changed. It needs to be sorted by potential like governmental input or subsidy, because
I think product regulation, like bringing more competitors to the market or something. But perhaps
open us up. Like why do we have such a closed?
Why does one company control a huge amount of materials? So we're at their mercy to a large degree, I think. But I think if we go back a little bit, I think the whole thing of group home builders is your house on your quarter acre section sort of thing. And I think moving forward, sprawling cities aren't probably not the future. Like, let's be fair. And I think like some cities are starting to understand that. Like Palmerston North's pretty progressive, and discussions with Hamish on that one. And like Hobsonville in Auckland, I think like it's very different for New Zealand, and New Zealanders take a little bit to get their head around it. But like, I feel like that is the direction the societies will hopefully go, because I think it's the only super affordable option. So that's like,
are you talking about shifting from
I think the whole typology
densification?
Yeah, the whole typology will start to change, which I think that's going to be a major thing that is more likely to bring more work to architects, because they're bigger.
Well, do you think that the group home build realm is up to play with this? Do you reckon that they are realizing this change and trying to adapt to it as well, or not?
I don't know. I don't follow them to a large degree, but I do know that there's a hell of a lot more architects working in like that Hobsonville area than non-architects. I don't know, Palmerston North made some changes or something.
This is interesting though. Consider Williams Corp, who are a group home builder. But they are medium density.
I guess they're the new type of group home builder.
Exactly. It's a new type. And they're
doing some rubbish.
They're catering for a part of the market that designers currently can't.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right, Ben, in the sense that I agree with you, Gerard, in that they seriously need to take a look at what they're offering from an aesthetic point of view. But in terms of what they're being able to offer from an affordability point of view, is huge, and at least they're doing it. And there's not many really that are doing it on that scale, which is pretty interesting. And like you said, they're probably the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head that have made that transition, or at least started in that realm of medium density. It's like the medium density group home.
Yeah.
They, other than developers, I guess, who have been doing it for a while. And now, interestingly, some of those developers where we were like, oh man, that's rubbish, actually, when you look back, they're probably not that bad compared to some of the other stuff that's being built out there these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was listening to this lecture by Joseph Rasmus Prince from Rex, used to work for OMA, and the lecture was basically on agency, like until architects kind of take on a bit more risk, like you're not going to have much of a say in what happens in the world. And so I think where these companies sort of go in, why they get more opportunities, why they have more sway over the whole industry, is that they buy up a huge amount of land and front up the cash, and they fund these whole things. So it's like it's not an uncommon problem for architects to want to solve, but it's like it does require you to go all in.
It's interesting though. Like if you break that down a little bit, they are basically getting investors on board, offering them a return, and that's how they're affording all these properties. So they're not paying for that out of their own pocket. They're paying for it with other people's money still. So I guess...
Yeah, but they're taking
the risk. Yes, they are. Yeah.
Like the buck falls on them. Whether you are the money's literally yours, or you're got a contract with somebody else to make them money.
So I guess the question here is like, how do we, as the architectural fraternity, how do we like ingratiate ourselves in this realm more? How do we kind of get ourselves in there to have a bit more of an impact? Because at the moment it feels like and like you said, Gerard, our intents there, our desires there, it's always been there. You talk about going all the way back to modernism and, the key principles of that. But we've really been afforded the chance on a large scale to have an impact on the built environment of a nation. It'd be really interesting to kind of get your guys' thoughts on ways that we could somehow have a better impact, or like ingratiate ourselves with these developers, with the group home builders, whoever, so that the outcomes are of a more considered and higher quality.
Yeah, I think as Ben says, like leading into that developer sort of thing, because I think a lot of architects are scared of that, thinking that it's going to compromise your quality and stuff. I think, I guess, finding developers that you can work with, or more in line with.
Mm.
I do want to point one thing out, which I thought was pretty interesting. Frank Lloyd Wright, I guess, was the OG group home builder.
Yeah.
Sort of, he had some series of plans back in the day, the old American system-built homes.
The Sears catalogue houses.
Yeah, so if we create everything as a design exercise, as we often do, I think, I don't know, everyone's been trying to find a solution to this for ages, but I guess Frank did his right on World War One, and then that kind of blocks a lot of that.
Well, that's an interesting point. Like you said, we've all been trying to come up with a solution. You're talking about Frank Lloyd Wright coming up with his. I'm thinking about what we've been doing recently with our SIP offerings. Why is it that they haven't been able to get off the ground? Is it because we as architects aren't as, I guess, we don't have the gumption to go forward and really seek funding and finance to make this thing a reality? Is that our shortcoming?
Potentially. Maybe those group home builders, a lot of them are actually run as a business, and their number one is to make money, and they do that by leveraging other people's money to purchase property and develop it, taking on that risk themselves. Whereas we're just kind of a profession, we kind of take it job by job. We have individual clients. Often those individual clients are just after a standalone home, so you're only servicing 1 to 4 people, whereas a lot of the times these guys are doing, like you said, whole neighborhoods, servicing a lot more people. Yeah. And also, not to point out that these are franchises, remember? They've made it easy. Their barrier to entry is extremely low. It's not that difficult to purchase a franchise. They'll basically help you on your feet no matter what part of the country you are. They've got all the systems set up, ready to go. And you basically you start your franchise, you get your builders on board, and you're off. Whereas, there's no such thing currently, anyway, that I know of, as an architecture franchise. And interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I guess as well, what they've got, which we don't have at our disposal as much, as the full raft of services, if you know what I mean. Particularly design, the design build outfits, which most of these are, they've got the design in-house and they're working directly with the builders. So you're not having to go out on a regular basis and renegotiate or re-engage with the builder time and time and time again.
There's more really and more design build companies out there.
For sure.
Days.
For
Lakers,
sure. But it'd be really interesting.
We just started a construction arm, so we're basically trying to we'll be doing the design thing, build side as well.
Your case is interesting though, Ben, because you're coming at it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say that you're coming at it from a design first, build second point of view. Whereas I feel a lot of these design build outfits are build first, design second, in terms of what their initial company
Yes, so their clients that come to them, they want to build a house, and then they're using their internal systems, which is whatever, they've got some architects or whatever, to pump out these building consents so they can get the construction underway, 100%. Whereas likes of us, I guess it would be the architecture first and then the construction after.
Yeah, you want people coming to you for high quality design and a good solution, but you can offer to build it as well rather than vice versa.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's quite important. Yeah. That's interesting as well. Just a different perspective, I guess.
Well, your position is it's pretty unique and rare. I can't really think of many others that come at from that design, the architecture first point of view, but also offer the build nature. It'd be interesting whether we as architects start to realize this issue, I guess, that we have in the built environment and start to go or shift down the path that you're going down a little bit more. I know for us, for instance, we're by no means approaching it in the way that you are, but what we do is we have a group of builders or consultants and everything that we will work with regularly time and time again. Yep. which offers efficiencies for the clients because we're not having to go out and shop out every single time. We're like, they come to us for a design, we use this team.
Yeah.
We recommend them highly, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, you know what you're going to get.
You realize efficiencies through that process as well,
Absolutely.
which is obviously saving the client money at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Don't you have a couple of set plans that you have, Sam? Is that?
Yeah, so I've been talking about that as well. So that's what we've been developing. This, we call it Citrus. It's sort of based. Got to be careful here because we got slapped with a copyright order for calling it Tetris housing. So it's called Citrus now. So we've sort of taken the concept of Tetris and the idea that, you know, these 6 very basic forms that can be sort of fit around each other. So we use those as the basis for our design, and have designed 6 housing options based off that. And the idea being is that, one, they are easily replicatable. So they're great for development. A lot of them can be sort of like tessellated and turned into duplexes or triplexes or what have you. And also they're off the plan. You know, we've done all the design work up front. Clients can just come to us and be like, oh, we like that one. We'll buy it off you. And there's a purchasing fee for the design and the consent process, and then we can recommend builders for them as well and take them through the build process if they want, or they can, you know, take it from the building consent.
Do you differentiate that from a RET from your company?
What was that? Sorry, Gerard.
Do you differentiate that service from your architecture practice?
No, we haven't at this stage. We kind of, you know, we started it relatively recently, and we just want to see if it, you know, gains any traction or if it's got any legs. I know, for instance, like First Light, they developed the flip housing solution, which is sort of like their equivalent to what we're looking at doing. And they have kind of, that's a whole separate company now. It sort of runs on its own legs. So there's definitely a few architecture firms out there that are looking at providing this off the plan solution. And, you know, these are high performing. I know, for instance, First Light's ones are all Homestar rated. Our SIPs ones are all Homestar, will be all Homestar design rated. So they're like high quality, affordable. They're not group home affordable because, like I said, we just don't have that buying power. But in comparison to a one-off bespoke house, you know, they're definitely far more accessible to a wider range of society. And so we're hoping that, you know, it sort of fits into that middle ground. And for people that are looking for a high quality new home can sort of, you know, benefit from those options being out there.
So have you gone through any of those? Have you
built any?
Yeah.
No, I mean, we only started working on the design. So we've built 3 SIP houses, and we've sort of taken our learnings from those and have applied them to the Citrus designs. And we started working on these designs, you know, late last year, maybe in sort of September, October last year. And we're just completing or putting the finishing touches on the last 2 designs. So we've got a series of 6.
Yeah.
We've had a few inquiries come in about them, but no traction yet.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a matter of being able to get it out to the general public and promote it in a better way potentially for us. And this comes back, you know, to like what we were talking about earlier, architects maybe not having the right gumption to really like push for these things. And from a development sense, maybe that's something that we need to look at a little bit more seriously.
Yeah. I wonder if a chunk of that is marketing. So it's like, I don't think architects particularly know how they're allowed to market. Like, I emailed NZRAB asking if I was allowed to like market, I guess, put posters out.
Yeah.
And I never got an email back, so I was like, oh,
what?
I shouldn't.
Of course you're allowed to put posters out. Why would you not be allowed to put posters out?
But like,
well, it's an interesting one. Like, our code of ethics is pretty prescriptive, and you're right, Gerard. It's really prescriptive, I should say, but it's also incredibly vague.
Yeah, incredibly
as to what you can and can't do.
Marketing's like frowned upon, so like we're kind of left with publications and
publications and word of mouth,
Instagram, word of mouth. Yeah.
Hey Sam, just going back a little bit to the SIPs. Who do you purchase those through? So does the builder purchase those through a Carter's or a distributor, or do they purchase direct?
So we are design partners with a company called Formance, who run out of Christchurch.
Yep.
And they
manufacture the product? or
They manufacture the SIP product.
Oh, so you're purchasing you're purchasing direct, so there's no kind of middleman there. Because another thing that we
Correct.
need to be really wary of is, these group
Merchants.
homes, merchants. Like I don't want to burn any bridges for myself here, but I can see that every time I drive past a GJ Gardner house, and they've got their building wrap up, it's clearly their own product, and I think they've kind of brought a lot of that in house. And so I think just trying to go direct as much as possible is, if that is an option without kind of burning any bridges, then that should be something you should look to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So like for the we as architects, we don't really have any buying power, right? We don't have any money. So it's not a lot of capital behind us. So it's not like we as the architecture firm can purchase this material. But what we have been doing with Formants and the builders that we use is, because we are design partners with them, what we do a lot of the time is the clients will buy or purchase the panels themselves. So we're already cutting out the contractor's margin aspect from it. Which is a huge saving. Margins these days are between 10 and 15%.
And it's a lot of money. What percentage of a build do you think that those SIPs cater for?
Well, if you consider it to be your internal lining, your exterior wall framing, your insulation, your rigid air barrier.
It's probably about 20%, maybe, up to.
Yeah, probably.
Interesting.
Do you sort of run electrical on the face or internal?
We've got a few different options. We've run them within the SIPs. We try and run as many services internally as possible, so we're not penetrating the SIPs. But we've also played around with using the SIP spline joints and running and routing out, particularly for electrical cable runs through that, but also you having little service skirts or packing up the SIP to run your services and that. So there's lots of different ways you can tackle it. But it's all a learning experience still at the moment. We're still developing our designs and coming up with new solutions.
Yeah. I do want to jump back on marketing quickly, because I think that's a huge difference between architecture and group home. Is that Jib will sponsor the All Blacks, and I don't know, GJ will sponsor huge sporting events and stuff. So, and their ads are absolutely everywhere. So
the ads are an interesting thing, Gerard. And this kind of peels back to our code of ethics to a degree. But, you hear GJ Gardner's New Zealand's most trusted home builder by whose metric? There's a couple of them out there. Jenny and Homes, I think it's 100% trusted, or whatever these taglines are. They're able to just, throw out these marketing ploys in terms of like a customer response tagline or whatever it is. But, if we did that,
that's pretty funny.
We'd be held hugely accountable.
Because I think they win. There's like the Certified Builders Association and the Master Builders Association and that sort of thing, and they have their own. They're kind of like the NZIA for construction, and they have their own awards and that. I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure that GJ Gardner often wins. Quite a bit, but that's pretty funny though, because when you're building 1,000 buildings, surely one of them's got to be a winner, right?
Yeah, well, that's it. But then also, surely one of them's got to be a winner. But not every project is roses. We've all been in this game a long time, and you only hear. It's funny because you only hear about the glowing success of a lot of these group home builds, right? I feel like that's what's put out into the community. That's what's promoted. Whereas from an architectural point of view, often what we all hear about is the pitfalls and my architect ran over budget.
Yeah.
They were difficult to deal with, blah, blah, blah. So it's like we almost are on the back foot and from a marketing point of view, because we're, I guess, from the general public's point of view, maybe perceived to be a little bit, I don't know.
That is a great pod, Architects Pitfalls. We have to do that for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a huge conversation marketing, but like the fact that architects don't really market, let's be fair. We don't market other than Facebook or like Instagram or something. And we hope to get magazines, and we hope that gets us some mileage. But I think like if the institute or something like marketed for us, like a couple of ads on TV or something, it'd be interesting to see if like any of that market share would shift, because like there's a huge amount of architects in New Zealand that do cater for that smaller, I guess lower end, like trying to make affordable housing. Like all architects, I think, are pretty intrigued by affordable housing, and Frank Lloyd Wright very famously took on a very affordable house and ended up working for free for a long time to make it meet the budget. So I think you'll find architects with that that want, I guess, to overcome that challenge. Like, oh yes, I can definitely create something affordable.
Yeah, that's
let's
all we
think
need
about this in a whole new way.
We just need every architect in New Zealand to do one pro bono property, and we're good to go. That's over 2,000 houses in 1 year.
It's affordable, but it's also, it's also quality, right? Like it's also aesthetic, it's also appearance. And I've just got this.
Well, the house Frank Lloyd Wright did was, massively ahead of its time. One of the first open plan houses. Like he ticked all those boxes.
I've got this really good quote here from Gerald Parsonson's from Parsonson's Architects, which I pulled out of an article the other day. I just want to read it out because it's quite interesting. He said, apart from the odd council design guide, New Zealanders have complete freedom to express their architecture, but the style of these new areas is often conservative and bland. The homes are promoted with product-driven material choices, interesting point there, and colours are often muted in greys, beige and whites. There are literally acres of roofs and shades of grey with the odd design features such as a schist wall or a coloured front door laid out along meandering roads and cul-de-sacs. There are too many areas that were once beautiful locations that have been destroyed by bad or dominating development. And I think that's a really interesting point to potentially end on, unless you guys have any feedback on it. But I think the key here is that we have we're very fortunate in New Zealand that we almost have complete design freedom across the board. But we're so often pigeonholing ourselves with these vanilla type outcomes. And I think that there's definitely scope from us and the group home builders to just be a little bit more creative, maybe.
Yeah, well, I guess it comes right back to appetite for risk. And that's why people go with group home builders, because they offer a fixed price, a clear, tangible, deliverable.
They do, but maybe they could do it with a little bit more flair and pizzazz.
What I'm hearing here, Sam, is we need to design more feature walls.
I was listening to that Marketing Office Talk podcast, the Australian guy, and then Chamberlain Architects in Melbourne have this company called RUM, which is essentially like what you were discussing before, but a separate company. Like they have a series of plans, and then in the podcast it seemed like it was going off like a cut snake.
Nice.
So I think there's huge appetite for it, and it's just another design challenge, I guess, on identifying the issues and how we come across them. I think marketing is a massive one, and actually within the profession understanding what we're allowed to do for marketing might free up more market share.
Nice.
But
nice.
I guess the different client you get, appetite for risk, some want creativity and some want a sure thing, but I think we can deliver both.
Nice. All right, Ben.
Well, I'm going to say a shout out to Connor Dolman, the absolute legend, who helped us with all of our original artwork and website and whatnot, and also Jacob Marshall for his awesome work on the introduction music. So yeah, thank you very much for your help.
Cool, guys. And if you enjoyed the pod, don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast channels, and we'll see you next time.
That's the part.
Next time.